Hello children, welcome back. See, in our last class, we had started with the second chapter, tissues. We had learned what is a tissue. We had learned types of tissues. I also told you that we will be dividing the chapter into two main parts, plant tissues and animal tissues. We had learned the noticeable differences between plant tissues and animal tissues. We had also learned the diagrammatic representation of location of different kinds of meristematic tissues. And I told you children that since plants are comparatively less complex, the tissues in plants will be also less complex. And most importantly children, you know that in plants there are certain localized areas where growth will take place. So wherever growth is taking place, you will find the meristematic tissue, and wherever growth is not taking place, you will find a tissue which is called a permanent tissue. Right? Now, permanent tissues we have to study in this particular module today, and we will be learning types of permanent tissues also. So, let us begin, children, with a small recap. This last time I had explained that plant tissues can be further classified into meristematic tissue and permanent tissue. Dividing tissue is the meristematic tissue responsible for growth, which can be further classified into apical meristem, intercalary meristem, and lateral meristem. Now, today we will be learning about permanent tissues. Permanent tissues can be further classified into simple permanent and complex permanent. Now, what is the difference between simple and complex? We will be learning. But remember one thing, that whatever tissue we will be learning today, that is the permanent tissue, cells of these tissues do not have the ability to divide, so they will not be responsible for growth. In fact, they will be performing a very specific function in the plant body, and it will be comprising of both living as well as dead cells. Okay, so you will find certain tissues which are living in nature and certain tissues which are dead in nature. So let us proceed further. Permanent tissue is derived from the differentiation of the meristematic tissue, which refers to the process where meristematic cells lose their ability to divide, and hence they become permanent in the plant body. Right? Now, let us study types of permanent tissue, as we are going to emphasize in this module very specifically on permanent tissue. Permanent tissue can be further classified into simple permanent and complex permanent. Simple and complex. What is the difference between the two types of permanent tissues? Simple permanent tissue is the kind of permanent tissue where you will find in the tissue a single kind of a cell performing a specific function. But complex permanent tissue will be comprising of groups of different kinds of cells together performing a similar function. I hope you get the difference, children. Simple will comprise of a single kind of cells performing a function, whereas complex permanent tissue is the kind of tissue where different groups of cells commonly will perform a similar function. So today in our class, we will be studying simple permanent tissue. They can be further classified into three types: parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma. And complex permanent tissue we will be dealing in the next class. They are of two types: xylem and phloem. So first, let us study the characteristics of the simple permanent tissue, that is the three types: parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma. Now, have a look at this diagram, children, to understand the structure and functions of the three kinds of simple permanent tissue. You can see in the diagram very clearly that this is the parenchyma tissue. This tissue is a group of cells which comprises of living cells. That is, all the cells are living in nature. If you see the structural features, then cells are oval in shape. They may be ovoid or round, isodiametric, oval in shape. They have intercellular spaces in between. Cells have spaces in between which are called intercellular spaces. You can see a dense cytoplasm, you can see organelles, nucleus, and a very prominent vacuole in each of the cell. Since they have big vacuoles, what is the main function of this parenchyma tissue? This parenchyma tissue mainly serves the function of food storage, storage of waste materials, and that is why they have big and prominent vacuoles, right? You can also see, children, that they have thin walls which are made up of cellulose. Okay, cell walls are thin, flexible, and they are made up of cellulose. Now, children, there are two types of parenchyma which you are going to learn. The parenchyma tissue generally is the most abundant tissue in the entire plant body. Okay, wherever meristematic tissue is not present, and in all parts of roots, stems, flowers, fruits, branches, the packing tissue is the parenchyma tissue comprising of living cells, and it is the most abundant plant tissue. Let us see the types of parenchyma. The kind of parenchyma tissue which is generally present in the leaves, which is having n number of chloroplasts or numerous chloroplasts, that kind of a parenchyma is called Sclerenchyma because it is rich in chloroplasts. Whereas Parenchyma is the kind of parenchyma which, apart from having all these cellular machinery, they have air cavities, and generally this kind of a parenchyma having many air cavities is called Parenchyma, which is generally found in aquatic plants, and it gives buoyancy, the ability to float, to aquatic plants. So these are the characteristics, features of parenchyma. Main function of parenchyma is food storage. Types of parenchyma are Sclerenchyma and Parenchyma. You can see cell walls are thin, made up of cellulose, and they have very prominent vacuoles. Now coming to the second type of simple permanent tissue, that is Sclerenchyma. If you compare the structural features of parenchyma and Sclerenchyma, you will see cells are roughly hexagonal or polygonal. They do not have intercellular spaces. Their cell walls are thin, but on the corners you can see irregular depositions. Wherever the cells are meeting, several cells are meeting, at the corners you can see irregular depositions of cellulose and pectin. So you can say they are also the living cells. They are polygonal or hexagonal. They have thin cell walls, but at the corners they have irregular deposition of cellulose and pectin. So when you observe the microscopic observation of parenchyma and Sclerenchyma, these irregular depositions distinctly segregate Sclerenchyma from parenchyma. And the main function of this kind of a tissue, simple permanent tissue, is to provide tensile strength and flexibility to young stems and leaves and branches in the plant, such that they can bend easily without breaking. You must have seen, children, even if a strong breeze is blowing, the plant parts, they sway easily in the breeze without breaking, right? So this ability of flexibility and tensile strength which is given to the young stems and plant parts is due to, or it is attributed to, this kind of a tissue which is called Sclerenchyma. Right? Coming to the third type of permanent tissue, that is Sclerenchyma. Now, unlike parenchyma and collenchyma, this tissue is a dead tissue. That is, the cells do not possess cytoplasm, nucleus, and other components. These cells are very tightly packed. You can see there are no intercellular spaces. These things that you can say, these gaps are the pits in the cell wall. The characteristic identification of sclerenchyma tissue in the microscopic observation is presence of very thick cell walls. Okay, you can see deposition of primary and secondary. This is the primary cell wall, main cell wall. There is deposition of primary and secondary cell wall, and this deposition is not of cellulose or pectin. It is of an even tough polymer which is called lignin. So you can say cell walls of sclerenchyma are made up of a very tough polymer called lignin, and because this is a dead tissue, the number of dead tissues in the plant imparts rigidity and structural strength, because I told you before also that plants have a sedentary existence. They are stationary and they need a lot of mechanical strength and rigidity. So the amount of dead tissue in the plant attributes to the strength and rigidity, and this tissue, sclerenchyma, is a dead tissue, a simple permanent tissue. Cells are similar and they perform the main function of imparting rigidity and mechanical strength. Sclerenchyma tissue can be further classified into two types of sclerenchyma cells, that is the sclerids and the sclerenchyma fibers. These that you can see, hexagonal cells, are the sclerids, whereas if you see a sclerenchyma fiber, then it appears spindle shaped like this, and it is made up of thick lignified cell walls, no cytoplasm, nucleus, okay, and they are all made up of spindle shaped long cells. These are called sclerenchyma fibers, whereas these are called the sclerids or the grid cells. Okay, you must have seen in different plant parts like husk of coconut, the outer fibrous covering of coconut, the hard nuts of almonds, and the different nut covering of the seeds. They are so hard, right? These hard parts are made up of which tissue? Sclerenchyma tissue. So imagine the strength provided by this tissue to different plant parts. You know, even the hemp fibers, the flax fibers, the jute fibers, the coconut fibers, these are all made up of a tissue. They are not any non-living thing. They are made up of the sclerenchyma tissue. So these were the three types of simple permanent tissues. You have learnt parenchyma, collenchyma, sclerenchyma, their structural difference, the cell wall difference, and the functional difference of all the three types of simple permanent tissue. Let us recapitulate in the PowerPoint. Types of simple permanent tissues. The first one, parenchyma, which is a living tissue made up of thin cell walls of cellulose, and it is the most abundant tissue in plants. Cell walls are made up of cellulose. They have big vacuoles. The main function of this tissue is storage of food and waste products. As I said, parenchyma can be further divided into two types. Sclerenchyma, that is the parenchyma rich in chloroplast, involved in food making in the leaf, and parenchyma is rich in air cavities found in aquatic plants, which gives the ability to float or buoyancy in case of aquatic plants. Right? Now coming to the second type, that is collenchyma. Collenchyma tissue, it is a living tissue. It is thin walled, but it is characterized by possessing thickenings of cellulose and pectin at the corners. They are compact, having no intercellular spaces, and this tissue gives tensile strength and flexibility to the aerial parts of the plant so that they can bend easily without breaking. The third type of tissue is sclerenchyma, which is a dead tissue having thick lignified cell walls. These are closely packed without intercellular spaces. They can be further divided into fibers and sclerids. Sclerids are present in the hard seed coats, the husk of coconut, the hard covering of almonds, and the grits of pear and guava. You must have seen, children, in guava and pear, you can find those hard structures or the seeds within the fruit. It is made up of sclerenchyma cells or the sclerids. And sclerenchyma fibers like flax, hemp, jute, coconut are also commercially exploited because they are very tough and rigid. Okay, so these were the three types of simple permanent tissues that we have learned today. In my next class, I will teach you the complex permanent tissue xylem and phloem. So this is all for today, children. Thank you and have a nice day.